Welcome to our candidate forum for the runoff election for mayor of Pasadena here in City Council chambers at Pasadena City Hall. I'm Paul Little. I'm the president and CEO of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce and Civic Association. I especially want to thank our candidates, Terry Tornek and Victor Gordo, for joining us here this evening for what is a socially distanced candidate forum. The forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Pasadena area and the Pasadena Chamber with very generous partners, Pasadena Media, who's broadcasting this over the Arroyo channel as well as Zoom, and the city of Pasadena, who are very generous to give us the room, but also the IT department, the information technology department, who have been very generous in helping us set this all up. I especially also want to thank the city clerk's office and the city manager's office for helping us with this as well. I want to assure everyone that we are socially distanced and safe this evening, as I hope everyone viewing is as well. Before we get started though, I do want to make a special note that for the past 6 months, healthcare workers in our city and all over the country have been working very hard to keep us all safe and healthy. And right now here in Southern California and all up and down the West Coast, firefighters are working very hard to keep the fires under control, or at least try to get them under control. And so we appreciate their efforts very much. Let's see. The other thing I want to encourage everyone to do, although you are engaged because you're watching this, is to make sure you vote in the election, either by mail or in person, before November 3rd or on November 3rd. It's very important to Pasadena and the country that you participate. Now, if you will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, those in the room, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to the League of Women Voters. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And again, I would like to welcome everyone to this candidate forum. It's the Mayoral Runoff Election Forum. And we also thank the Pasadena media and the candidates and all who are participating in this webinar. This forum is being held in the City Council chamber, as you just heard, and we are socially distanced. And it is also being broadcast on the Arroyo channel. And in case you're interested in the Arroyo channel, you can find it on Spectrum Channel 32 and AT&T Channel 99. It's also on Fire TV and Apple TV and Roku. So we are definitely in the modern age here. My name is Dorothy Keene, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Pasadena area, which includes Pasadena as one of the San Gabriel Valley communities that we serve. I do not live in Pasadena, so I will not be voting in this local election. I do not live, The League's charter is to promote informed and involved participation in governance through education and advocacy. We study and act on public policy issues, but never endorse or support candidates or parties. We assist in forums like this as part of our voter services program. In the November 2020 election, there are 2 candidates competing for the position of mayor of Pasadena. This is a term of 4 years. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the rest of the League team. In addition to me, we have Michelle White, who will be serving as timekeeper, and we also have Catherine Gavsey, who is serving as the question sorter. So as you send your questions in through the Q&A, Catherine will be taking them and will only sort them for questions that are alike, and any questions that are inappropriate that are attacking either candidate will be discarded. The candidates will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement about themselves and their candidacy. The candidates will be speaking in an order based on the number that they drew. The timekeeper will keep each candidate informed of the time remaining and will raise a red card when his time has elapsed. Once a candidate's time is up, he should conclude as quickly as possible. The audience, again, is invited to write questions in the Q&A to be answered by the candidates. And of course, this is a webinar, so there will not be any spoken questions. All of the attendees are muted and their video is off. It must be, however, in the form of a question and not a statement. If there are several questions that are similar, they will be grouped together by the question sorter. Questions must deal with the issues of the election. No personal reference or attacks will be allowed. So each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer audience questions and will be tracked by the timekeeper. We are allowing a one minute to follow up on a given answer if requested. The follow-up response must focus on the question. No personal attacks are allowed. At approximately 8:15, the question period will be terminated and closing statements will begin. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their closing statement. Remarks will conclude at that time and there will be no opportunity for rebuttal. Are there any questions from the candidates as to our process? Seeing, yes. 3 minutes for the closing? All right, I've been corrected, and we will allow 3 minutes for the closing statement as well. We also want to make sure that we're giving adequate time for our electorate to ask their questions via Q&A, and we have received some questions ahead of time. You were all invited to submit when you signed up for the webinar, and I know some more will be coming in during the evening. And so we will get started now with the opening statement.
Warning before 1 minute. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, good question. Yeah. All right. So, Mr. Gordo, would you start with your opening statement, please?
Thank you. I'd be honored to. I first want to join Paul in thanking all of our first responders during COVID. Thank the League of Women Voters and the Chamber. Thank you all of those who voted in the primary and voted for change. I remain humbled and honored that I came in first place. I believe your support of my campaign is because you know me. You know Pasadena is home to me and not an urban planning exercise. You know that when I talk about our parks, it's because I played in them. When I talk about our schools, I attended them. I led on early childhood education. When I talk about our neighborhoods, I lived in our neighborhoods. I also delivered the Pasadena Star News. When I talk about our local businesses, it's because I participated in our local businesses as a waiter and in other ways. For nearly 30 years, I've committed myself to improving this community for everyone. 24 years directly in my city council district, nearly 20 years as a member of the city council. My record is clear. I listen, I build consensus and I work towards solving difficult issues. I do believe that I believe and respectfully that I am the most experienced and best qualified person to be mayor of this city. I've worked on almost twice the budget as my opponent, capital improvement and operating budgets. I, together with my colleagues, 8 years before my opponent joined the city council, prepared this city for the housing crisis, for the recession, and then wound our way through it. Public safety, I've worked hard to protect it and improve it. Affordable housing, I built, together with my neighbors and colleagues on the city council, more affordable housing in my district than any other district. And I challenged my opponent to tell us how many affordable units were built in his district when he was a member of the city council. Resolving bargaining unit issues, I'll tell you that I believe I've had a hand in keeping our workforce contributing to us when the city needed it and helping out, but also treating them fairly. Accomplishments, let's go back to Ambassador College to protect West Pasadena neighborhoods. Let's talk about the NFL, where I voted not once, but 3 times against the NFL. I had a hand in the Rose Bowl project in the convention center. Unlike my opponent, I have consistently said no to the 710 freeway each and every time. And even when he voted no, yes, I voted no against the freeway when he refused to. Inclusionary housing, before my opponent joined the city council in 2006, we led the way. Affordable housing, we've gotten rid of liquor stores and replaced it with beautiful housing. Minimum wage and Measure I would say to you, I had a hand in that. It was a team effort. Most recently, I led up on COVID because I was here. I met with employees, I met with businesses. I demanded food security. I demanded guidelines for residents and for businesses to operate safely and move about safely. I advocated for vulnerable seniors, met with small businesses, and most of this before my opponent returned from an overseas trip. I will continue to be here for all Pasadena residents. Thank you for your consideration.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Tornek.
Thank you. Like everyone else, I would like to thank the sponsors. And I would like to thank you, people who are actually taking the time, in spite of all the challenges we're confronted with today, to spend the time with us this evening. I think it's really a central theme for what all of us are dealing with right now. We have really, in spite of all the challenges, the unique challenges that are confronting us, we have to carry on. We have to do our jobs. And I think that's particularly true with regard to city government. In spite of extraordinary challenges and a combination of sort of unprecedented challenges, the city must continue to deliver customary services to its residents and also take on some new tasks that it typically has not had to take on. I think that Pasadena has performed well in this very trying set of circumstances, and I think that I've done my part as mayor. But I also think that I've been effective not just during the pandemic, but in accomplishing what I outlined that I would do when I was elected 5 years ago. When I ran for office, I said that I would focus on making Pasadena financially strong, I would support the PUSD, I would safeguard the environment, I would protect the quality of life in the neighborhoods, and I would reduce crime. I don't do these things by myself. This is a city council manager form of government, and we all have to pull together to make it happen. But it does require leadership in terms of really making sure that we remain focused on those issues that are most important. Now, because of these challenges, we're going to have enormous trials going forward. The impacts of this pandemic, the financial impacts, the personal impacts, are going to be long-lasting and very serious. We've got to restore business activity. We've got to adjust our land use regulations. There are a whole series of complicated things we're going to have to do. I believe that my performance and my training, my experience, and what I've demonstrated to date suggest that I would be well suited to those challenges. I hope that you will give me the opportunity to continue in that service as your mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, the chamber has submitted a few questions, and we're going to start with their questions. And the first question will be answered by both candidates, but we will start with Mr. Gordo. In 1994, Pasadena voters supported a general plan that required more dense development in downtown and near transit hubs while reserving our neighborhoods. Are there areas where you would like to see development increased and/or places you think are being restricted? Mr. Gordo.
You know, the plans are just that. They're plans. They're forecasts of what we believe and how we believe the city should evolve. We have to be prepared to adjust plans. And what I've heard from people many times is we have to take a step back. Yes, absolutely, the general plan's goal is to protect neighborhoods and build development where it's appropriate in the downtown. But we've seen lots of development occur that has gone beyond what I consider to be the vision and the view of the general plan. Let's take the project at Los Robles and Villa that recently came to the city council. Double the density, double the height, no affordable housing. I spoke out strongly against that project. My opponent defended the developer and the project. I've heard from residents say, this is the kind of development that we can't see encroaching into our neighborhoods. This is the kind of development that not only fails to provide affordable housing on site as we imagined and as we adopted in the inclusionary housing policy and all of our affordable housing policies, but it's development that ruins the fabric of a neighborhood, doesn't take into account the parking needs of current residents, let alone future residents, doesn't take into account the burden on our infrastructure, and leads to not affordable housing, but housing for people and the benefit of people who don't live here, the developers and residents who I would suggest to you won't live there, who live in Pasadena already and won't be able to afford to live there. That's the kind of change and adjustment that the people of Pasadena are demanding, and we should review the general plan for that reason.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek.
The 1994 general plan and its successor documents, the one we adopted a couple of years ago, have had a clear theme of saying that Pasadena should have some modest growth, but we need to control that growth and make sure that it's just in the downtown area and in the areas near the Gold Line. I think, and at the same time, we need to protect our single-family neighborhoods. I think that's sound planning. I think that what's happened is that, and also I should say, we've established caps on an area-by-area basis in terms of the total number of units that can be built there. The latest version of the general plan actually reduced the caps in terms of total development of housing units and commercial square footage from the earlier version. So Pasadena's got a very clear grip on what it thinks is appropriate in terms of growth. I think what's happened is when it's said that this activity, running for office and serving, is not an urban planning exercise, it's true. But I think that the urban planning role is critical because it means that the thousands of people that participated in developing that general plan have raised their voices in a careful and coherent way, set a blueprint for the city to follow, so that we're not confronted with a kind of case-by-case decision-making where passions are raised, individuals raise their voices, and we lose sight of what the overall objectives are for our city. So I am a big believer in the general plan and in the planning exercise as it's been described, because I think it most accurately reflects the will of the people and is most beneficial to the city in the long term.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gordo. Would you like another comment on that?
I would. You know, yes, the general plan was adopted, but the general plan is never set in stone. The law allows for amendments, and the people who participated, well-meaning people who had a vision for Pasadena. But as the plan has evolved, we've heard from other voices, including people who participated in the adoption of the general plan. And we can't forget that we represent people, not plans. You know, it's not the plan at all or any cost. It's the people that we have to remember to listen to. And if we need to, adjust where appropriate. Not losing sight of the original intent, but refining and improving the general plan in order to reach the ultimate intent of what was adopted. Protecting neighborhoods and having reasonable growth.
Thank you. Mr. Tornek?
Yes, thank you. There's nobody that's more focused on protecting neighborhoods than I am. When I was planning director in 1983, I wrote the ordinance that was that gave birth to all the historic districts in Pasadena. I got back into public life in terms of running for the city council because there were some condos built against the rear lot line of my lot. Looming over, not one project, but two looming over my rear yard, and I couldn't understand how the city's regulations had been modified since I'd left the city as planning director in a way that allowed that to happen. So I won't cede ground to anyone in terms of neighborhood protection or motivation, but I do think that and certainly the general plan is not set in stone. It continues to evolve. But I think that orderly process that protects the larger view of the city and the real future of the city is more important than responding to a few loud voices that may be raised around any given project.
All right, thank you very much. And now we will move to the second question. And the second question was also submitted by the Chamber of Commerce. And I will direct it to you, Mr. Tornek. During the pandemic, Pasadena elected officials and city staff have been very supportive of our business community, especially our restaurants. Do you see the measures that are facilitating businesses reopening continuing in the future? What more can Pasadena do to support businesses once the crisis is over?
I think the city has responded reasonably well. There's been a lot of focus on restaurants because they play such an important part in our city and adding to its vitality. And we've got a lot of them. We've got more than 600 restaurants, and the national forecast is that as many of a third of the existing restaurants may fail as a result of the pandemic. So clearly they are sort of at the tip of the spear, but I think we've got a much larger problem than just restaurants. I think we've got small businesses of all kinds. I had a Zoom meeting with some dry cleaners, for example, and their business nationally is off by more than 75%. Many of them won't survive. And I think we've got all kinds of businesses that are going to be shuttered as a result of the pandemic. The short form answer to your question is the city will have to continue to be engaged in supporting our businesses. We need to look at our regulatory environment. We need to look at innovative programs. We need to lobby both Sacramento and Washington to make sure we get our fair share of assistance because the city's budget can't carry the whole load. But mostly we need to be engaged and make sure that we are accommodating the needs of the restaurants in terms of regaining health, whether it means continuing to allow sidewalk dining or varying some of our regulatory fee structure in a way to give them a chance to recover. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of blank storefronts and a continuing hemorrhaging in terms of the revenue we collect from these businesses, and people who will be out of work because they won't be able to go back to work in these businesses. So clearly the city has been engaged during the course of the pandemic, and we'll have to continue to be engaged in ways that we haven't traditionally been.
Thank you. Mr. Gordo.
You know, engagement is the word, direct engagement. You know, and I recall in March and April, when I was demanding that we not cancel meetings, and our incumbent said something along the lines of, what difference will it make? Now we see the difference that it makes, why we shouldn't have canceled meetings. When I and others on the council demanded, let's schedule meetings, let's hold committee meetings, our businesses and the people of Pasadena need us now most. Yet meetings were canceled. I had to write an op-ed piece. I met with businesses, restaurateurs, small businesses in order to hear directly from them. And I demanded that we put in place reasonable regulations and guidelines, that we think about using space differently so that they could reopen safely. I made those demands because I know the pain that they were feeling. I know that they were suffering. And I went out and met with them directly. And we are going to have to continue to be engaged, and we are going to have to evolve our assistance. And what I mean by that is already I'm hearing from as recently as this week, I met with small business owners, including restaurateurs, who are saying to me, the change is coming in the weather. Let's start talking about the regulations and how we might evolve those regulations. Heaters, for example, outdoor space in the winter and the rain is different than outdoor space in the summer. Let's talk about Sacramento regulations and begin the work of ensuring that Sacramento doesn't treat some of the waivers and the regulations for outdoor dining, as an example, or retail, as temporary. But let's start to work with our neighboring jurisdictions to lobby Sacramento to have an interim plan and then a more permanent plan. I think the COVID crisis will change how we think about space and how we think about business being conducted in the public sphere, and we should get to work on it right now.
Mr. Tornek, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I think that the issue of how you can intervene effectively is an important one, and how you exercise leadership. I think there was some difference of opinion about the numbers of meetings, council meetings and committee meetings that should have been conducted in the early stages of the pandemic. It was my feeling that the city staff, which is responsible for actually engaging these regulations and the businesses most directly, was really at wit's end and really extended almost beyond the breaking point. And to have them spend hours and hours, not in this chamber any longer, but on Zoom, engaging city council members with important discussions, but discussions that were pulling them away from doing their major task, which is actually getting the work done, was not the most productive use of their time. So we did limit the number of meetings, and I think that was a good allocation of time. That did not give short shrift to interaction with the businesses. Staff was in fact meeting with the businesses and having those discussions with them. I was trying not to replicate their work.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gordo, respond?
Yeah, you know, I have to disagree with that. The staff, yes, the staff was working, but they were focused on, in my view, different issues. You'll recall that as I was requesting, together with the full Economic Development Technology Committee, that we be allowed to meet, and were denied that opportunity. Because what the planning staff was doing at the time was working on a planning commission meeting. Instead of meeting with the city council to talk about the needs of businesses or the city committees, council committees, they were processing cannabis permits for companies that don't even exist in Pasadena. That's what was happening. And that's why I objected, and that's why I put in writing in an op-ed piece, we need to meet and take care of the city's business and address the issues of our local businesses before we process cannabis permits for corporations in Las Vegas who want to come here. Let's take care of the people who are here conducting business now.
All right, thank you. And now we move on to the third question that was submitted by the chamber. And this question is going to be directed to Mr. Gordo. Focusing on the city's financial outlook, the pandemic has impacted finances at most businesses, in many households, and in government. What are the current fiscal realities for the city, and how would you address the financial challenges facing Pasadena?
You know, another reason I was demanding that we meet is to talk about the city's finances. You know, this is a big operation, $878 million now that the city council is in charge of, in trust on behalf of the people of Pasadena. We've spent down our reserves, the 5%, the 15%, the unassigned. We've allocated about $27 million of it. With COVID costs, it's about $32 million. The Rose Bowl, I said, is going to need help. The convention center is vacant, and an indoor venue likely to remain vacant. So I am worried about that. I have been worried about that. I remain worried about that. Fortunately, together, as a city council, we prepared for this. But that even the preparation that we made, close to $80 million in reserves, can go very quickly in a pandemic like this. I'm concerned about some of the projections. Our hotels, for example, are operating at about 35% capacity. Two of our major hotels, the Sheraton and the Langham, remain closed. Restaurants, we see how fragile they are. Retail will never be the same again. We were very fortunate to have a strong assessed valuation in property taxes. We are very fortunate that we have a diverse economy, but we can't let down. We have to maintain focus on how the city is going to evolve locally through COVID and post-COVID. not necessarily and not just for tax purposes, but to protect, as you mentioned, Dorothy, to protect our local employees and businesses, because they're the ones who ultimately will support our city hall and our city workforce and the services that they provide and our residents demand and rely on.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tornek.
Thank you. The city has in fact had a significant setback as a result of COVID. We've, as was referenced, we've taken about a $30 million hit as a result of reduced revenues from various sources. Happily, we were well prepared for this rainy day, and our reserves were well over $70 million, and they still remain, the major reserve component still remains largely intact. We have been very scrupulous about the way we've been doing our budgeting. I have devoted my State of the City message every year almost exclusively to budgetary matters and established the predicate for Measure I, which was the voters approved by a wide margin, and has generated $21 million a year, 7 of which we give to the school district. That $14 million was intended for capital improvements and now has been repurposed for operating activity. And with the exception of the Rose Bowl, which is the major cash demand, the unanticipated cash demand that's come out of this crisis so far, to the tune of about $8 million for this coming year, we are not in a position where we have to cut services or reduce our activities, but we are going to have to be mindful, and we are going to have to be careful about how we spend our money, what we do in terms of collective bargaining with our unions, who have been very patient with us and have had expired contracts that they've extended working with us. But I think if we continue with a kind of a careful fiscal policy that we've had during the past few years, that we should be able to weather this storm, in spite of it being a big storm, in much better shape than most cities will.
All right, thank you. And respond, Mr. Gordo?
You know, the 15% reserve, the bulk of the reserve, as I believe Mayor Tornek puts it, is $41.3 million. To give you an idea, in 2 years, if the convention center can't get back to operations, that could easily be eaten up by the convention center, as well as the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl will require about $12 million if we can't reopen the stadium. I'm hopeful. I'm hearing good things about football, even the Rose Bowl game. And so we're hopeful. The Rose Bowl is looking to think differently. But let's think about and act differently. But let's think about the convention center, indoors, conventions. Zoom has changed the world. We could have a convention center that's vacant 2 and 3, 4 years from now. Let's hope not, and let's work to avoid that. I've asked that matter come to the city council. It is not. I'm looking forward to it because the convention center needs help too, and we need to protect the city's budget, short-term and long-term.
Thank you. Respond?
Yeah, I will say that the Finance Committee has been meeting twice a month. We're meeting every 2 weeks, looking at the existing impacts, projecting impacts, examining all of the components that threaten our fiscal health. The good news is that the major source of revenue for the city comes from our real estate tax revenue, which is very solid. And the same development that has come under such close scrutiny and is objected to by some is what's generating is a tremendous driver in terms of finances for the city. So that I'm optimistic about the outcome as long as we are responsible, as we have been over the past few years, in terms of how we manage our finances. And I think that our reserves will hold up.
All right, thank you. And now we are moving to question 4, and this will be directed to Mr. Tornek. And it has to do with policing. How will you support continued civilian oversight and the independent auditor?
The civilian oversight concept that was adopted unanimously by the City Council a couple of weeks ago and will be before us in ordinance form, I hope, on Monday, is really the result of careful listening to what the people had to say. Councilmember Kennedy and I generated a version of a proposal for discussion purposes. We were roundly criticized for taking the initiative to move in such an expedient way, but we felt that this was an issue that was so important to so many people and was so fraught for people in our city, so emotionally fraught and touched so many nerves, that it was not one that would abide by the sort of typical meeting strategy. And so we had the audacity to actually draft a proposal that was based on work that had been done and brought to the City Council unsuccessfully 4 years ago. So my commitment to moving civilian oversight, both the commission, the new Citizen Commission, and the independent police auditor forward is well established. I'm hopeful that my colleagues will agree to adopt the ordinance on Monday, and that we will be able to swiftly appoint the Civilian Oversight Commission and put the independent police auditor in place. As Councilmember Kennedy has said, this is the first step in a long process, not the last step. But you can be assured that I will continue to be supportive of moving this forward, and I think there's a lot of interest and demand for making that happen.
Thank you. Mr. Tornek.
Gordo.
I'm so sorry,
That's
Mr.
all right.
Gordo.
I'll answer again.
We're often confused.
Well, that's because you're making me do all this back and forth.
So, you know, our city, our country, I think the world has evolved on oversight. And we all agree it has to be real, it has to be responsible, it has to take into account that there are very hard working men and women protecting us every day, but that the issue is trust. And that's what we are striving for. And on the issue of oversight, you know, it concerns me when I hear the mayor of this city say that, you know, that's an issue that's fraught, and therefore 2 members of the city council and 2 members alone deserve to run off and develop a policy outside of the public eye. Where do these meetings occur? 2 members of the city council of the public safety committee, Mr. Madison and Mr. Hampton, whom I have a great deal of respect for, very passionate, very involved, and very knowledgeable on this issue. And this issue is too fraught for their input. I reject that. I think Pasadena has a long history of working together as a council, as colleagues, and including the public input, especially on issues of trust and oversight, especially when issues are fraught with, well, fraught's not the word I would use, that's Mr. Tornek's word, especially when there's going to be differing views and opinions, and especially on the most sensitive, important issue in any municipality, public safety. And so I reject that. And on the issue of transparency and trust, half of our public safety committee is excluded. And what comes back to us isn't where we ended up. I rejected it. Why? Because it was business as usual. It didn't have the independence that we now see, that Mr. Hampton and Mr. Madison and I and others argued for initially. It didn't address the issue of trust. Now we're getting there, but we have to be measured, and we have to be responsible, and we have to be deliberate. But we have to do it together and with the input of the public.
Mr. Tornek, respond?
Yes, it's such a gross mischaracterization that that members of the council were excluded. We had 3 public safety committee meetings on it. The only thing that was somewhat different is that instead of relying on staff to do the drafting and do the heavy lifting on this, Councilmember Kennedy and I took the initiative to derive the information from, as I said, the elaborate study that had been done 4 years earlier and presented to the council, and said, look, here's a place to start the discussion. We can't talk about this in the abstract because we have to make this happen, and we have to make it happen now. So to characterize that as a as a sort of as secret meetings is just nonsense and does not reflect what actually happened in the process. I'm proud of the process. It's not one that I think would work in every circumstance, but given the intense interest and the emotional reaction that people were having, and the fact that things like this can go down kind of a rabbit hole and disappear for months at a time, meant that we couldn't conduct business as usual, and I think that's part of what leadership means.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gordo.
Leadership is bringing people together to work together. Leadership is trusting that your colleagues, even though you may disagree, will ultimately together come to the correct conclusion that's in the best interest of this city. That's what we did on other difficult issues. It's what we've always done. When the question of whether or not we should have a health department in place, Mr. Madison and I and others led the charge saying we need a health department in place. This is in 2010, 2011. And we didn't come back and say this is the Gordo-Madison proposal. It went to committee and we debated it and we discussed it. We found a way to save the health department. On minimum wage, another controversial subject, it went to the Ed Tech committee that I chaired. Mr. Madison, Mr. Hampton, Mr. Wilson. We didn't come back and say this is the Gordo, Wilson, Madison, and Hampton proposal. This is the proposal that our community debated and came up with and presented to the full council and to the community in public debate and discourse. And we came up with solutions together.
All right, thank you. All right, now we are moving to another question. And this one is going to be directed to Mr. Gordo. Am I right on that?
Yes.
Keep me honest up here. The county has placed Measure J on the November 2020 ballot. Pursuant to this measure, up to 10% of the locally generated unrestricted county money would be diverted to meet community needs and alternatives to policing. Do you support diverting a portion of the city police budget to fund mental health and other services that are better provided by other agencies rather than the police? Do you support Measure J?
You know, I think, you know, we're all elected to make difficult decisions and to debate those decisions in public. I recall when people entertained the possibility of getting rid of police helicopters. I said, you know, that involves public safety, that involves officer safety. We can't do it. This notion of defunding the police started long ago. And I said, we can't do it. We should think of ways to deliver services differently. I advocated for civilians to be in our parks so that police officer resources could be freed up. I advocated for park safety specialists to fulfill that role, and it was rejected. I advocated, by my opponent and others, I advocated for us to bring the NAC team back, the Neighborhood Action Team, to build relations in the community, and it was a struggle, but our police chief finally made it happen. I don't support budgeting by legislation. I support working together to debate matters, to debate matters publicly, to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. I believe that we can do a better job with the resources we have in every department, in human services. I think, and I've asked long before this crisis started, more than a year ago, I asked to review department by department how we were using resources, including the police department, and whether we could be more efficient and effective. I raised that probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. We did get through 2 departments, but that was it. We didn't schedule those meetings. And so here we are continuing to have the discussion about the effective and efficient use of resources. We shouldn't limit it to one department. We should look at all departments. But I cannot support doing it by legislation with a broad sweep, because that's not thoughtful, it's not inclusive of everyone's voice, and it could cause problems.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek.
One of the things that we've been talking about, first let me say that the idea of defunding the police department was, I think, a misapplied term, and even the advocates have now kind of described that as reimagining the police department rather than defunding it. But when that issue arose and it began to get such intense scrutiny, one of the things that we did was we had the staff bring to the Finance Committee a breakdown of how the city is spending all of its resources, not just the police department, but all the departments. And so you can begin to aggregate the amount of money that's being spent on public safety as opposed to sort of human resources related activities. And there were some surprising results to that. People were a little bit surprised when they saw the totality of expenditures of all city funds, not just the general fund, in terms of how those dollars are allocated. We then had further discussion about at the Finance Committee and now at the Public Safety Committee, more specific to the police department. So this discussion is evolving very thoroughly and carefully in terms of how we allocate our resources and how services are provided by the police department and whether any of those services might be more appropriately provided by other departments, or at least not by sworn officers. I don't think that a straight percentage allocation, apart from saying that it's aspirational, is a good way to do budgeting. I think it's a dangerous way to proceed. I haven't studied Measure J in detail, although I will before I vote. But I think the idea of just sort of arbitrarily saying we're going to allocate these dollars in a fixed way has led to serious budgetary problems for other entities, both at the state level and the county level before.
All right, Mr. Gordo, do you care to comment?
I do, and we should, I should add that besides looking at the city's use of existing resources in every department, we should also question the county. Remember, we do have our own health department, but mental health services, as an example, that's the example that was used in the question, is mostly the purview of the county. We rely on those county services, and I can't tell you how many times I've asked at this dais that we bring the county health department here to answer our questions, and it's not been agendized. I can't tell you how many times I've said, let's bring the director of mental health, let's bring our supervisor in, and let's ask, where are the portals for mental health, the portals to entry for services, for mental health services in Pasadena, as should be provided by the county. And we need to, besides hold our own feet to the fire on the responsible use of resources, also hold the county's feet to the fire on the responsible use of resources in this city, including mental health.
All right, Mr. Tornek.
I think that the relationship with the county is a vital one. And in fact, the HOPE teams that we have, which is a combination of specially trained police officers and non-sworn social worker mental health experts, is a joint venture with the county. So I think that model is well established. I've been talking a lot, particularly during the pandemic, about mental health issues because I feel that they are becoming, it's a very intense problem during the course of the pandemic. And in fact, I recorded a PSA last week where I urged people to, and gave them the website information on where to go, both for county resources and city resources as it relates to mental health. So I quite agree that the issue transcends just the city budget, but I think that we can do a better job in terms of making sure that the way we allocate our own $800 million total budget between and among the various services is more readily understood by the public, and that they are supportive of the way we are allocating our dollars.
All right, thank you. All right, and the next question will be directed to Mr. Tornek. It is, tenants constitute 57% of Pasadena's residents. According to city planners, more than half of Pasadena's tenants are rent burdened, paying more than 30% of their income on housing, and 27% of them spend more than 50% of their income on housing. What is your stance on rent control for Pasadena? And how would you address housing security for Pasadena's renters?
I think the city has been really a model in some ways of how we've attempted to deal with the affordable housing shortfall in our city. This is obviously a regional problem, a Southern California problem, but we have been very active in terms of designing programs and doing activities that will enhance the availability of affordable housing. I have a personal record in terms of having participated as a volunteer for Pasadena Neighborhood Housing Services for nearly 20 years, which was the major affordable housing nonprofit in Northwest Pasadena. And then I served on the board of Link Housing, which is a statewide effort and has built 5,000 or 6,000 units across the state. So I'm very conversant with the available resources and how you can manage that. Pasadena, through its inclusionary ordinance, which requires that 20% of any new project be devoted to affordable housing, and the other actively pursuing and working with nonprofits to develop additional affordable housing, has been doing a pretty good job in that area. Can we avoid the shortfall? Absolutely not. But I don't support rent control because the evidence is pretty clear that rent control deters the production of additional housing, which exacerbates the problem, and also discourages people from maintaining existing housing. So it's a kind of an easy fix that people think will solve the problem when in fact I think it will make it worse. We have to do our best to produce more affordable housing, to build them on city-owned sites, to build them on church-owned available property, to build them on school sites. We're continuing to build them at the Civic Center, which is a proposal that there's a hearing on Tuesday. I think we need to produce more housing, not have rent control.
All right, Mr. Gordo.
You know, I've watched rent control fail in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Santa Monica, some of the most expensive markets. And so this is probably one area where Mr. Tornek and I agree on, but we do have to recognize the fact that renters are hurting. And I think starting in 2006 with the inclusionary housing ordinance, before Mayor Tornek joined the council, some of us in this room worked on that. Some of us in this room have worked together to get rid of liquor stores and replace it with affordable housing. Some of us in this room understand the need. I'm surprised that Mayor Tornek says it recognizes now it's a regional in Southern California issue, because that's what I argued at the Housing Forum in the primary, that we need to work with the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments. And instead, what I consider to be lack of leadership pulled us out. 31 cities in the San Gabriel Valley now are participating in a housing trust to create more affordable housing for the region, to leverage local resources. 31 cities in the San Gabriel Valley, San Gabriel Council of Governments, but there are only 30 members. Pasadena is not there working with its neighbors. At the Housing Forum, some of you will recall the answer that Mayor Tornek gave that should never be said by any mayor of Pasadena, is those cities are smaller than us, they're not relevant. I reject that, and I believe that we need to get back to addressing the issue of housing on a regional basis, together with our neighbors, leveraging local resources to bring more federal and state resources, as they are doing today without Pasadena. And Pasadena is not at the table and doesn't benefit from that. Lobbying Sacramento, lobbying Washington, D.C. I believe our neighbors are relevant, and now we're seeing why.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek, do you care to comment?
Yes, I think one of the answers to producing more affordable housing in Pasadena is not throwing in with the San Gabriel Valley COG, which has had a traditional failure and lack of interest in affordable housing of all kinds. I think it's the very last group that we would want to join with. The trust has yet to produce any significant results. Pasadena is in much better shape in terms of, they look to us in terms of how we do things rather than us joining them. The trust is another illustration of the COG's abdicating its responsibility with regard to producing housing. And I think this is another one of those red herrings that somehow joining communities that have traditionally objected to the producing of multifamily housing in general and affordable housing in particular would somehow benefit the city of Pasadena. These are cities, many of them, that objected even to the Operation Room Key in terms of taking care of homeless people during the pandemic. I don't think that this is necessarily a group that we want to rejoin.
All right, and Mr. Gordo?
I would invite everyone to visit the COGS. These are our neighbors, neighboring cities, over 2 million people. I would invite everyone to visit the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments website. The trust was just put together in the last eight to 10 months, the Housing Trust. And our neighbor, Arcadia, Monrovia, are members of the Housing Trust. Pasadena is not. Pasadena has historically led. We should be leading, and then it's absolutely true that other cities look to us as leaders. And it's absolutely true that they should, because we are. This is the greatest city, not just in the valley, but I would say to you, in the universe. We are leaders, and we should be united as a city, come together, work together to improve affordable housing for all, but also as a region. And I say Pasadena will do that.
All right, thank you. And the next question is going to be directed to Mr. Gordo. And I have 3 questions, and I'm going to try to just summarize them into one. What citywide system will you introduce to help keep Pasadena residents informed and able to respond to COVID, to fires, and to other emergencies, and particularly the Bobcat fire? Mr. Gordo. Repeat the question?
Please.
I'll try. What citywide system will you introduce to help keep Pasadena residents informed and able to respond to COVID, to fires, particularly the Bobcat, and to other emergencies?
Again, going back to working with our neighbors, COVID, the Bobcat fire has affected everyone in this region. And I think we need to have better regional communication, not just among the cities and the residents, mayors and city managers. And that's another reason for us to rejoin our neighbors in the work of homelessness, in the work of affordable housing, in the work of transportation and traffic and development, but also for moments of crisis, moments like we're experiencing now, to better improve our ability to communicate with residents as a region, because we're all in this together. We are the crown of the valley, but there are a lot of other people around us. And so the systems that we have, first off in Pasadena, we need to do a better job of making those systems known to residents and ensure that they sign up. But let's also, as we do with police and fire communication systems, where our radios and communications are to be coordinated, let's also have a communication system with our neighbors, with Monrovia, Sierra Madre, Altadena, La Cañada, and beyond, Monrovia, Brentwood, all of the cities in our region, to have a better regional communication system that communicates directly with residents, not just with our first responders.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek.
Yeah, I think that there is an information shortfall in terms of being able to communicate effectively with our residents. I know I've been recording every week. I record an announcement updating that's broadcast over the same channels that some of you are watching tonight, that tries to broadcast information to our residents in terms of updates on COVID. With regard to, that's a longer term problem that requires periodic updates, and so I've been trying, and so the city public information officer uses social media. The social media presence has been beefed up in the city, and we also have, but when you get to a real emergency, a short-term and intense emergency, we have systems in place called Nixle and Please, P-L-E-A-S, And we've been urging people, there are tens of thousands of people signed up for those systems that do put out announcements to the public when there is an emergency. Sometimes the announcements cover too broad an area, so that the announcement that had people, to ask people to be aware and get ready, covered a part of Pasadena that really wasn't even remotely threatened by the Bobcat fire. So there needs to be some fine tuning, but there are systems, and this is a great opportunity to urge the viewers tonight to sign up for PLEAS, go to the fire department's website in the city of Pasadena and sign up for that, so that when there is an emergency, they will be notified, and we can do a better job.
All right, thank you. Comment, Mr. Gordo?
No, we can do a better job in Pasadena, I agree. You know, the short PSAs viewed by a couple hundred people, that's not going to do it. We have to affirmatively invite people to participate in Nixle and Please. But again, let's see how we can do better at refining our own systems and do what we believe, what we know can work, working with our neighbors.
All right.
Yeah, I certainly don't reject the idea of working with our neighbors. We, as Councilmember Gordo knows, we have mutual aid relationships on the public safety level. We have a joint communication systems with Glendale and Burbank. In fact, the neighbors that we work with most effectively and are probably most appropriate for close connections in a variety of areas, including some that have been referenced earlier, are not so much the San Gabriel Valley, I think, but rather the emerging relationships with Burbank and Glendale that have the closest affinity with the city and have the most to share. And beyond that, we have a new joint powers authority, which involves the Arroyo Verdugo, JPA, which includes Pasadena, Glendale, Burbank, La Cañada, and South Pasadena, which we have very close coordination with in terms of transportation. And I think over time, that will be the logical sort of intercity relationship that I would like to see evolve.
Okay, thank you.
No question, but we can do both. And Mayor Tornek, if our neighbors to the east, to the west, and to the south are relevant, I say to you that all our neighbors to the east and to the south and to the north are too relevant. We can do both. And we should do both.
Thank you. There have been several questions on the following topic. The City Council provides the ultimate oversight of the Pasadena Police Department. Do you support council members receiving financial support from the Pasadena Police Officers Association? And if you care to share, have you accepted money? Oh, and sorry, Mr. Tornek.
I have never accepted contributions from any employee union, not because it's forbidden, but because I've always felt there was a potential of at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. If we're voting on the contracts of an employee union to accept contributions, political contributions from them, wouldn't necessarily taint my votes on any of that, but I felt the appearance of it made me uncomfortable. So I've never accepted, not just from the police union, but from the fire union or any other municipal employee union. But I think that in fairness, I think more has been made of this than is really fair. I think the whole area of campaign finance is, I'll use the word again, fraught, because there is no, that's why there have been discussions about public financing to sort of eliminate it as an issue. But whether you take money from an employee union or anybody else, there'll always be the question of whether that results in inappropriate influence peddling. And there have been some scandals in Los Angeles and elsewhere that relate to other kinds of campaign contributions. So I think it's a little bit unfair to single out a single entity and suggest that because you accept money from them, that somehow that would influence your ability to make a decision that was in the best interests of the community.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek.
No, Mr. Gordo.
Mr. Gordo. Sorry, Mr. Gordo. I'm looking at his name and looking at you. Sorry about that.
You know, the Police Officers Association did contribute to one of my campaigns in 2017. They did not contribute to my mayoral election, and I don't recall them ever contributing prior to any prior election that I've been involved in. So, you know, but look, I'm proud to have the support of our firefighters, for example, because they pool their money together to ensure that our government is well run, to ensure that we elect people who care about training, who care about services, who care about their own safety and their equipment that they need. These are hardworking men and women that pool their dollars to contribute to candidates that they believe in, and I'm proud to have their support. I do the scandal in Los Angeles that Mayor Tornek is talking about involved development and development money. People who are out profiting and changing the fabric of cities physically, and increasing the price of housing everywhere. And I have pledged not to accept their dollars. They often come from one person, or people who have voted, who have had projects supported, or who hope to have projects supported. I think we need some changes and some reform. And we should look at the whole question of contributions, and we should look at the whole question of campaign finance. I think those are important questions to have. But I'm always leery of not having transparency in who is contributing. We're fortunate in Pasadena, we have a Taxpayer Protection Act. And we have full sunshine on all of the contributions, and people should look those up. People should see who is contributing to various and all campaigns.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek, a comment?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Are we finished with that one? Okay, great. All right. Then we've had several questions about the environment, and this one is, how safe is Pasadena tap water, and what are our water sources, and how much are they affected by microplastic particles? That's checking your science knowledge here. So we start with you, Mr. Gordo.
Yeah.
Yes, we start with you.
You know, the issue of water and the quality of water is an important one. Not to belabor the point, but that's also an issue that's important to the entire region and to the entire basin that we're a part of. Water is an issue that all of the cities that we turned away from and said weren't relevant over my objection. That's an issue that they all work together on. That's one of the issues that the COG handles, water, and goes to Sacramento and debates, and that's appropriate. Water in Pasadena is safe. We should always, we test. I'm not going to try and recall the level of particles that are in our water, but I can tell you that we've had very, very robust discussions about particles and water and changes at the city council level and changes in standards at the federal and regional and state level. This is an issue that the council does through its municipal services committee, of which I'm not a member, does pay close attention to. We should continue to monitor, particularly because, we do have JPL, and there has been some history there in terms of plumes and plumes infecting our water table. And so we should never let our guard down on testing. We should hold every agency, federal, state, and local accountable. including, by the way, the county, who is responsible for part of the watershed. Water is a very, very complicated issue because it involves local, county, state, and federal jurisdiction.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tornek.
Yes, we're back to the COG again. I will tell you that I attended COG meetings for 8 years on behalf of the city. Water is not one of their areas of heavy expertise. There's minimal cooperation. Most of the water-related policies are established by the individual water districts. Pasadena gets 60% of our water remotely, that is to say from up north, from the Delta and from the Colorado River. And 40% of our water comes from local wells. Most of the concern has focused on the local well production and the intrusion from JPL plumes and other contaminating sources. Pasadena does its own testing, which is then verified outside. We publish an annual report which lists in mind-numbing detail all of the standards, and even in some categories the federal government hasn't established standards. They have suggestions in terms of sort of aspirational goals. So that information is readily available. As to the issue of microplastics, that has not been the focus of a great deal of attention to date, although the questioner is very sophisticated. That is an emerging issue. There is not a standard to my knowledge there, but be assured that Pasadena spends a lot of time and effort making sure that we comply with all standards, and we do publish that information, so it is a very available, and we try to make it as understandable as possible. And I think that it is one of the important services that the city, having our own water and power department, is one of the things that really makes Pasadena a terrific city.
Okay, thank you. Would you care to comment, Mr. Gordo?
I think it's hard to comment on what the COG finds as an important issue when we're not there, and I think we're sidestepping that point. We need to be there, and if they're not focused on it, then we ought to focus on it, because well, if they're not sufficiently focused, as Mayor Tornek seems to believe, I disagree, then we ought to be there. That's why Pasadena should be leading again. The issue of standards changing all the time, microplastics, that's correct. That's an evolving issue. Appropriate for us to have our own water and power department. I recall when people wanted us to turn the utility over to private operators. And I recall Mr. Little, who's in this room, and others being a part of that question. I think Pasadena made absolutely the correct choice to control its own destiny and keep the utility so that we can control water and power in Pasadena, and we should continue to do that.
Mr. Tornek, do you want
A small point, I don't think there was ever a suggestion about privatizing the water part of the enterprise. It was really focused on the power side. I don't think anybody ever suggested that Pasadena should sell the water side of the house. But I do think that there are some bright things ahead with regard to what we're doing with water conservation. One of the things I do is I serve on behalf of the city on the county sanitation district. They have a joint project with to develop recycled water, and the city itself is beginning to examine various methods of how we might be able to retain water, recycle it, and use it for irrigation, so we don't have to use potable water for irrigation purposes, and particularly on things like the golf course and around the road in Brookside Park. If we can save potable water by using recycled water through technology, that would really be a breakthrough, and it's something that we're working hard on.
I did not mean to imply privatization involved both sides of the house. That's why I said so we could control our own destiny on water and power. It was involving the utility on the power side, and I'm glad we reject it. And today we control water and power.
Okay, thank you. The next question is going to be referred to you, Mr. Tornek, first. The Arroyo Seco has been referred to as Pasadena's Central Park. What is your vision for the Arroyo Seco from the South Pasadena border past Cajamarca? I hope I didn't murder the name of that area.
That was right. That was right. Good job. No, this has been one of the really key portions of what I've attempted to get after as mayor. I believe that the Arroyo Seco is a resource that's unequaled. I call it the beating green heart of Pasadena. It's much bigger than Central Park. And I think that it is a remarkable place that in many ways is being loved to death. There are so many different activities happening in the Arroyo Seco that it really almost can't sustain all the activity that it's being applied for. And people know the Arroyo Seco in different ways. They view it through the lens of the way they use it. So if you're a bicyclist, you know it in one way. If you're a Frisbee golfer, you know it another way. And if you're a Rose Bowl football fan, you know it in yet another way. They all have to coexist in this wonderful resource. And so I urge the creation of a foundation, a private foundation, to help marshal additional resources and focus on the Arroyo. That group is underway now. They're out with their preparing for their first proposed demonstration project, which will go through the normal city review procedures. And I'm hoping that over time they can begin to play a role in terms of engaging people, both in terms of participation and in terms of funding improvements for the Arroyo. The Arroyo is unique because it has so many different aspects, from very kind of wild areas up in Cajamarca to very intensely used areas in the central Arroyo near the Rose Bowl. It has a casting pond, it has an archery range. I mean, it's got anything you can almost imagine. And so it's one of our key resources, and has been one of the reasons I'm running for re-election, is to try and make sure that effort that we've launched really gets well established.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tornek. Mr. Arroyo. Mr. Arroyo,
I'll
Mr.
take
Gordo.
I'll take Mr. Arroyo.
That's not fair.
The only thing I won't call you is Mr. Hamanga, because I can't say it.
No, leave that out, but
So,
I'll take
sorry,
Arroyo.
Mr. Gordo, go
I'll take
ahead.
Arroyo on this question. So, the Arroyo has been, well, number one, the Arroyo is one of our greatest assets. It's the greatest public space. I mean, if people think about it, the Arroyo and the expanse of the Arroyo, and you imagine it in your mind's eye, there is nothing like it in our region. There's nothing like it, I would say to you, in Southern California. It's special, and we should protect it, and we should rehab it. And the foundation that Mayor Tornek describes did not start with one person. In fact, Mayor Tornek, you'll recall that I said to you, we have to do something in the Arroyo to coordinate, to be responsive to the needs. And Daryl Dunn, the general manager of the Rose Bowl, said, let's go visit Central Park. And I said, I'll go, and other great spaces. I'll go, but we need to bring the mayor of the city and the city manager. And that's where the idea was born. When I asked Mayor Tornek and the city manager to come along on that trip so that we could work on improving the Arroyo together. We came back, there was a committee appointed that then grew the foundation. Those are the facts. We did it together, and now we need to ensure that group works. I'm proud of the fact that the two leaders of that group, that foundation, are Mayor Bill Bogart and Doug Kramwinkle, who are both working very hard on my campaign. They know the history of that group. They know the importance of protecting the Arroyo. They know the importance of coordinating activity in the Arroyo so that we don't overburden that important space, so that it's a space that's available, that's natural for Pasadenans. And yes, people from the region come and enjoy it also. More reason to have better coordination in the Arroyo and to have a private group raising money to rehab the oil.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Reply? No reply? Fine. All right, we'll move on to another question then. And this question is first going to be addressed to Mr. Gordo. Northwest Pasadena is undergoing gentrification, and many lower-income families are being permanently displaced out of the city. What is your position on locating additional affordable housing in this area of the city? And please state your reason.
You know, Michelle, who's sitting in the room with us, knows the history on gentrification in Pasadena and how complicated an issue it's been. You know, people invest in their homes and then they sell it and other people move in. You can't go to the seller and say don't sell. You can't go to the buyer and say don't buy. And so we have to do a better job of providing additional affordable housing. And I've been at this issue since I was elected to the city council. I supported Granny Flats, Michelle, when others did not. And I called for a better second unit ordinance. We sought about replacing dilapidated, burned out buildings and liquor stores, a burned out building on Hudson and replaced it with affordable housing, Hudson Oaks, a former nursery and replaced it with affordable housing, liquor stores that were a nuisance, the entire neighborhood and city, and replaced them with affordable housing. The HHP project on Fair Oaks transformed the entirety of Fair Oaks coming north from the freeway and rehab beautiful homes. I think the battle against gentrification is providing more opportunity for people to have affordable housing. We can do it strategically by looking at properties that are in need of development, in need of investment, and then working with partners to do just that. And I have a 20-year history of accomplishment in that area, and I'm going to take it with my colleagues further citywide. There are other properties citywide that could use the same level.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tornek.
I think that there has been some confusion about overconcentration of affordable housing. And I think that while it is absolutely critical that there be affordable housing distributed throughout the city, that the idea that somehow Northwest Pasadena has absorbed its limit is misplaced. I think particularly because the nature of affordable housing has changed over the years from large, dense developments to smaller, for the most part, smaller developments or portions of market rate developments, that the idea that Northwest Pasadena has had its limit and we should discourage the construction of any more affordable housing in Northwest is misplaced. So I think that because gentrification is raging in Northwest Pasadena, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that if there's a way of retaining people in the neighborhood they grew up in, and where they have institutions that they rely on, we should do everything we can to make that possible.
All right, thank you. Yes?
No one is saying that any part of the city has reached a limit, but what people are saying is, you know, we have a city policy, the inclusionary housing policy, that says affordable housing should occur naturally as development occurs throughout the city. There are some neighborhoods where people have said, you know, within 3 or 4 blocks, there are large developments. And nobody's saying that any part of the city has reached its limit. What people are saying is, let's be thoughtful about it. People in our city deserve the right to live in every part of our city because they've grown up here. They love this city. and no one should be limited to any one part of this city. Having said that, that's why I was so offended by the project at Los Robles in Villa that had zero affordable housing, and that's why I spoke out so strongly against it.
Mr. Tornek.
Well, I think the delays that were associated with the completion of the development planning for Heritage Square South were an example of how I think a misguided application of overconcentration really delayed a project that could have been underway quite a bit earlier. And I think the illustration of the most preliminary submittal on that Los Robles project at Villa, that's a project that deserves careful scrutiny, is probably too dense, but the fact that we allow projects to be built off-site frees up funding to achieve greater distribution of affordable housing. I'd have an affordable housing project on California around the corner from my house in District 7 that was a result of an off-site development of affordable housing as part of a larger project. So it is a strategy that can bear fruit.
All right, thank you. All right, and the next question is dealing with the environment, and it's going to be directed first to Mr. Tornek. The drought has strained our water company and climate change has impacted our electric usage. What can our utilities do to create more homegrown water and electricity resources?
Well, the homegrown water issue is one that I referenced earlier. We are now in the process of developing I do serve on the Municipal Services Committee, and our water people are working hard in developing strategies of recapturing wastewater, particularly storm runoff, to be recycled and reused, which is effectively like producing water. I mean, that is a perfect example. In terms of the electric grid, we've seen the limitations that are imposed when we are confronted with these overload conditions, these super hot conditions, which are no longer as novel as they once were. And Pasadena has enough capacity, homegrown capacity on Glen Arm, to be able to meet our needs. We've been very smart in terms of how we've combined resources and retained on-site gas-fired capacity for emergency short-term use. But I do think that the committee has been urging staff to move faster in terms of examining a more aggressive use of storage, electric storage, so that we can save energy in surplus production periods and retain it for the 4 or 8 hours that the technology now allows, and allow us to not be as reliant on this giant grid, which is now an interstate grid that sometimes can get overloaded and leave us in the condition of having to experience the kind of short, happily, brownouts that we did a couple of weeks ago.
Mr. Gordo.
So let me start with electricity and renewables. You know, the state had set the goal of 33% by 2020. Pasadena was ahead of the curve, and we said 60% renewables by 2020 in our portfolio, is my recollection. But we can and should do more. But we have to balance that with the cost to the end user, to the residents of Pasadena, including those who live on fixed incomes and can't afford a sudden spike in their bill. And so we should continue that conversation. And Municipal Services Committee, the full committee, is absolutely the place to have that discussion, and then the City Council. In terms of recharging the basin, absolutely. We are participating in that, and we should encourage every city who is a part of the basin area to do the same thing, including the County of Los Angeles that represents some of the area. We should work with the municipal water district. We should work with anyone and everyone who shares that goal with us to recharge the basin. Ultimately, that's good for all of us. This is one of those areas that also has crossover with development and development capacity. This is one of the reasons why I've suggested that we challenge the state in their imposition of, their new RENA numbers and their imposition of more development. I'm sorry.
The sound failed, and they asked us to hold off for a minute.
Okay. So my answer is recharging the basin, absolutely. We should do that. Working with the county, the cities around, encourage recharging the basin, and we should do in terms of Pasadena, the state's goal, 3% by 2020, Pasadena at 60% by 2020. And we should redouble our efforts. But again, keep in mind very implications in terms of cost. Where the technology has gotten better, renewables are more affordable, and that's very good news. And so we should continue that discussion at public safety. I'm sorry, at municipal services, and then at the full council, so we can have a robust public debate. And this is an area that crosses over with development, and why I have suggested for quite some time now that we challenge the state on their imposition for large numbers of new units for Pasadena, because we have to control our own destiny. And not just in development and how the city evolves, but think of the infrastructure. When have we measured the impacts to our water capacity, to electricity, to all of the services that we rely upon? And so there's crossover when it comes to water and energy and development, and we need to be thoughtful and with those issues, because they do blend in together. And we need to have robust public discourse. And importantly, we need to control our own destiny as residents of Pasadena for all of those reasons.
And Mr. Tornek, would you care to comment? Or?
Well, the only comment I'd make is that, the city has been working hard to be on the sort of cutting edge with regard to both energy conservation, green energy, and water conservation. In fact, in spite of development, we're using less water as a city than we did in 1940. I don't mean just on a per capita basis, but I mean in absolute terms. The new development is much more energy efficient and water efficient than a typical unit ever was. But so capacity is not so much the critical variable here. I think the issue is being smart about it and finding an acceptable balance between being on the cutting edge in terms of being progressive and green, while not creating a pricing situation that makes it very challenging for people to be able to afford.
All right, thank you very much.
Mayor Tornek is absolutely correct. It's not just about capacity, it's the infrastructure too. The infrastructure that's over 100 years old that we are paying for. We just went back out to market on I think it was just over $50 million in bond indebtedness to improve our infrastructure. It's absolutely about capacity. It's absolutely about infrastructure, and it's absolutely about protecting the people that live here now and the quality of life and our precious resources.
All right, thank you very much to both of you. And this is going to be the final question before we invite you to give closing remarks. And it's a two-part question. What do you see as the most pressing problems for Pasadena? And what is your vision for the future of your city? And I'm going to ask Mr. Gordo to answer first.
The most pressing issues involve the health and safety of our residents. And that means a combination of COVID, it means a combination of public safety. It means also to me people who are less fortunate, homelessness, people who can't afford to make ends meet, we need to protect. But it also means to me that we need to support our local small businesses and our businesses in general, because ultimately they're the ones who employ the people that we're seeking to protect. You know, I grew up in a garage for a part of my life before my parents were able to achieve the American dream and buy a house. And so I know what it's like, you know, to work in restaurants. My father retired from the same restaurant in East Pasadena after 50 years at that same restaurant. And so most important to me are the issues facing the health issues, the economic issues, the housing issues, the public safety issues that are facing the residents and the businesses and the business owners and families and individuals in the city of Pasadena. My vision is that we get back to working together as a city. And I was very proud to have the support of people throughout this city in the primary. And I know that we're ready to work together as a city, then work together as a city council, and then work together with our neighbors in the region to improve the quality of life in Pasadena and for all residents of Pasadena.
All right, Mr. Tornek.
Yeah, I think that sitting in the mayor's office, which I haven't been able to do for a while, actually, but electronically I still get the same information. You're confronted with a series of good ideas coming from the public. People have a series of ways that we can improve the way we run the city, things that we should be doing that we're not doing, or things that we are doing that we could be doing better. And I'm frequently really amazed at the ingenuity and the clarity that people have about what's really important. And one of the things that I've realized early on, and part of it comes from the fact that I was a department head in the city and then went out into the business world to make a living. And I realized that if you haven't got the resources, if you haven't got the financial strength, you can't do any of you can't implement any of these good ideas. So in terms of the most pressing problem, the single thing that is a sort of a North Star for me is that we have to make sure that the city remains financially strong. If we don't have the ability to do that, if we're not generating revenues, if we're not doing effective management to control the expense side, we can't do any of the great things that people would like us to do. So, I worked very hard at that during my 5 years as mayor. I need to continue to do that, and that challenge is even greater now because of the inroads made and the challenges on both sides of the equation, demands for more services and a reduction in revenue that the COVID pandemic has imposed on us, which will be playing itself out for a couple of years to come.
All right. Do you care to?
No, absolutely. The financial health of the city is important, and that's why we need to protect our local economy and the residents of the city, because ultimately they're the ones that contribute to the city's finances. There is no secret or unknown contributor to the city's finances. It's people. It's people who live here, people that we should look out for. It's small businesses. It's employees of those small businesses that contribute to the financial health of this city, and that's why those residents and business operators are my priority.
All right. Thank you to both of you. I know you've had many questions on many different topics, and you had the opportunity with the last question to pick out the focus, the problem, the major problem of the city, and I believe you have addressed it. And so now we will move to closing remarks, and you will each be given 3 minutes for your closing remarks. And the person who will go first is Mr. Tornek.
Okay. Thank you all, for those of you that have managed to get through this, even with the challenges that I guess we've had electronically. And thank you to the sponsors again for hosting this. I think it's a great opportunity for people to not just assess the candidates, but to get informed about important issues in the city and what other people consider to be most important. My practice in terms of how I try to serve as your mayor has been to listen carefully to what people have to say and what the staff has to say in terms of their reaction to requirements we impose upon them. Then to study the issue as carefully as I can to gain as much information as I can, and I don't think there's anybody that outworks me in terms of trying to study an issue and become as informed as I can be on it. Then tell the truth, tell the people directly what my thinking is on it, and then deliver, make it happen. I think people expect the truth and demand it and want to hear it, not in a kind of a couched way or what they call a political way, but to hear it as straight talk. That doesn't help me with some people, but I think for the most part people appreciate it. I think that it's been suggested that somehow that kind of straight talk and the is not collegial and doesn't comport with the Pasadena way of doing business in a very collegial and polite format. I would suggest that while my way may be a little bit more direct and blunt than some may be comfortable with, that in fact on the three most challenging issues, the most controversial and complicated issues that have confronted the council during the course of my being mayor, the minimum wage, the Measure I, the decision to launch Measure I and Measure J, and the police oversight process, that the council has delivered unanimous decisions on all those, good decisions that were done unanimously. And I think that that would tend to belie the idea that somehow I'm operating in a autocratic or non-collegial way. I hope that that you will understand that the challenges facing the city going forward are significant. I certainly do. I think I have a proven track record of success during my service on the city council and as planning director and as now as mayor for the past 5 years. And I hope that you will give me the opportunity to continue that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Mr. Gordo.
Truth and directness is important, and I have joined in that. Very direct and very, have made my opinion known well in all of these public debates, and would like to believe that had a hand in persuading people on all of those issues. The minimum wage issue came to EdTech, and I managed that discussion. Measure I and J, no one member of the council deserves credit. In fact, I raised the bulk of the money quietly to ensure that that measure passed, and Mayor Tornek asked me to do that, and I did it. And education, all of these issues. And so I want to thank everyone for participating, for looking closely at the issues, and let me again thank everyone who voted in the primary and expressed citywide confidence and support in my campaign for mayor. I'm running to represent all of the residents of this city, continue what I've always done, listen carefully as I have, and bring us together to work towards sensible decisions, as I have for almost 20 years. That's why I'm supported by former mayors, by a council member-elect, by the most senior member of the city council, by former superintendent of schools, Vera Vignes, and I think the primary results show that across the board, there is citywide support, and I appreciate that for my candidacy, and I appreciate that very much. I will work very hard to bring us together, so we're working as neighbors to address the ongoing COVID crisis, to address the economy during COVID, post-COVID, to address the issue of development, affordable housing, to push back against Sacramento. As a product of the Pasadena Unified School District, whose wife is a public school teacher, I can assure you there will be no stronger advocate for our schools. You can trust me and know that I'll never pre-bake decisions and then offer the my way or the highway attitude. I believe strongly in Pasadena as a place where we live, not an urban planning exercise for me. My approach will never be that I know better than everyone else. My approach will be, as it has been, to believe in the people of this city. I'm asking to be our next mayor because I care for, love, and believe in the wisdom of the people of this city. And I will be a mayor who will represent all of the people in this city and always act in the best interest of the people of this city. And I thank everyone for your consideration for me to be our next mayor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to both of you for an interesting evening. I hope that the public who have listened have learned more about your views and your policies and how you, in fact, will lead Pasadena as its next mayor. So I thank the people attending on the webinar for taking the time to be part of the forum. As stated earlier, the League's Voter Services is to promote an informed and involved electorate. We hope that we have succeeded in helping you become better informed about your choices in this election. But now we have to turn things over to you for the involved part. Please participate in our democracy by casting your vote by mail or at a vote center, and urge your friends and family to do the same. If you contact 3 friends, and they contact 3 friends, and they contact 3 friends, and you can continue this yourself, we will have many more people voting in this election. So we all need to take responsibility. It is a critical election in our country, and I encourage all of you to do all you can to not only vote yourselves, but to get everyone you come in contact with who is eligible to vote. And by the way, the deadline for registering to vote is October the 19th. If one has missed that date, they can register to vote at a vote center on election day, the mail-in ballots will start coming out on October the 5th, and they will be coming in a rotating fashion, but the 5th is the first date, so look for your mail-in ballot, be informed, and then you will also find out on October the 5th where your drop boxes are in each of the cities. And of course, you can also go and vote in the post office. Drop your mail-in ballot off in the post office. So the League of Women Voters encourages all to vote and all to get all of their friends and families to vote as well. And with that, I'll call this forum to a close. Thank you very much.